is making a comeback.
With the open admission by a co-founder of Black Lives Matter that she and her comrades are Marxists through and through, one wonders if this will cause people to turn against Black Lives Matter. From the advent of the Marxist philosophy until today, this ideology has wrought all manner of evil across the world. To say that Marxism is a failed form of government is to state the obvious, and yet so many still find it alluring. Join us today with a ton of information about real Marxism. My better half, Liberty Nation's Washington political columnist, Tim Donner. Hi, Tim, and thanks so much for joining us on Truth TV today.
Always a pleasure, Lisa.
Well, let's dig right in. What is the Marxist ideology?
Well, Marxism is essentially the ideology that serves as the underpinning of the communist political system. It all began with Karl Marx, who wrote Das Kapital, which later became known as the Communist Manifesto. That was back in 1848, before the Civil War. It essentially envisions a godless, classless society, top-down, command and control, no private property or business, no dissent, all based around ending class struggle, essentially by eliminating the rich and poor and creating a classless society, a workers' paradise.
Yeah. Well, in the 20th century, Marxist rule was, carried out in the Soviet Union and much of Eastern Europe. So how well did that work out for the people?
Well, I think we all know the story, except many of the young people who aren't being taught it in the schools about the tyranny of the 100-year march of communism. It all began in 1917 when Karl Marx's vision was finally realized in the Russian Revolution. They overthrew and executed the Tsar. And then after World War II, the Yalta Conference resulted in a division of Western Europe and Eastern Europe because the Soviets had lost many more people than we had in World War II. So they were given essentially control of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, a divided Germany, several other countries. And that form of tyranny took the Berlin Wall to contain in 1962 until it was mercifully and to much celebration torn down in 1989, and the Soviet Union itself dissolved 2 years later in 1991.
All right, so today we have China, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos as Marxist states. But it doesn't seem that life has improved for these people.
No, the misery index is still very high in these remaining communist countries, a whole lot less than there were in the 20th century. China and Vietnam have tried to soften the edges by instituting reforms, of course, allowing private business to prosper while still denying political freedom. This is a very dangerous model, which says that you can have some economic freedom without political freedom. Those systems collapse in the end, Lisa, because you really can't have real freedom. You can't have political freedom or economic freedom, one without the other.
Well, then there's the sad state of Venezuela. I wanted to discuss this as a standalone because, what's happening there is just so horrible and essentially in our own backyard. I mean, first of all, would you call Venezuela a Marxist state? They seem to refer to themselves as socialists. Are we looking at a difference without a distinction?
It is a distinction and a difference, but not a whole lot of either. Because Venezuela really, Lisa, is just pure tyranny. I'm not even sure that there's any real ideological underpinning. It's just Nicolas Maduro running roughshod on a society once very prosperous that he is now absolutely destroyed with out of control totalitarian leadership. People are fleeing by the millions. Socialism, though, is being presented by those who support it as a more moderate form of Marxism, the kind you see in Denmark and much of Western Europe, which only means high unemployment perpetually and perpetual low growth in the economies, but it doesn't involve the same level of tyranny that you find in places like Cuba, where people have been willing to swim through shark-infested waters in order to escape the boot of the Castro brothers.
Finally, what do you think is the allure to communism and Marxism to the young people of today?
Well, the young people of today have not been schooled on the misery the starvation, the deprivation, the absolute loss of anything approaching freedom in these countries. They haven't been taught that, so therefore the raw ideology first developed by Karl Marx back in 1848 is looking attractive because of it promises to make a paradise where everybody is equal and everybody is happy. And we've seen, it's understandable to believe that 100 years ago when communism and Marxism had not been tried as a form of government, but to look at what's happened, the over 100 million by any account that have died under communist rules over the last 100 years, to look at that and say that's what we want is to absolutely be in a dangerous state of denial.
Well, thanks very much. That's Liberty Nation's Washington political correspondent, Tim Donner. Read Tim's columns and insights on issues of the day on libertynation.com. And for some cleansing of your political soul, don't forget to tune into Tim's weekly radio program, appropriately titled Liberty Nation, on the Radio America Network and on fine podcast providers everywhere. Thanks so much for joining us on Truth TV today, Tim.
Thanks, Lisa. I've enjoyed it.
Truth is making a comeback.